Hey everyone, Chris here with the first filler video of Season 4. And for this one I've decided to take a look at a modern, indie, first-person shooter I've been playing a lot of lately. Ziggurat. This is probably one of the most unique first-person shooters I've played in a while on a variety of levels, including the fact that it's essentially a cross between a first-person shooter and a dungeon crawl. But don't get me wrong, this isn't an RPG in the slightest. The main goal of the game is to go through these dungeons, killing monsters with a variety of magical weapons, and there's really not much to it beyond that, save for the extremely large number of weapons, amulets, and perks you can acquire. The initial release of Ziggurat was only a few months ago, back in October of 2014. It was made by a small 4-man development team known as Milkstone Studios, which has been responsible for a surprisingly large number of lesser-known titles, including a frantic 2D shooter known as Infinity Danger, and even a game simply called Wool, which involves herding sheep in elaborately designed playfields. The story for Ziggurat is fairly simple. You play the role of an apprentice wizard taking part in a ceremony to become a full-fledged member of the most powerful wizard guild ever known. This ceremony involves delving into the Ziggurat, along with many other apprentices, each looking to prove their worth and take their place amongst the other members of the guild. But there's a catch. The Ziggurat is a domain of evil, constantly shifting in appearance and danger. This ceremony serves to control the evil within, but extremely few apprentices ever survive to the end, and it's a one-way trip, meaning the only way out is through. Actually, before you even start playing, you get to choose your character. When you first acquire the game, only one character is unlocked, Argo the Apprentice. As you clear various objectives, you unlock even more characters, with most of the objectives simply being related to various enemies or events, so it's just a matter of going through those things enough times, and thus unlocking all the characters is just a trivial process. Now, each character has their own pros and cons, save for Argo, who's a straight-up average character. Now, some of these traits of these characters can be very interesting. Kraz the Novice, for instance, has an extremely powerful magic wand, but can't store much magical energy for the other weapon types. Corvus the Vampire has an extremely large amount of health, and regains health simply by picking up experience gems, but he constantly loses health at a very slow rate. And then there's Saiph the Librarian, and ignoring his powerful spellcasting abilities, he doesn't gain experience very fast, but he gains an extra perk choice when leveling up. This is something I'll get into in a bit. The gameplay itself is extremely straightforward. You move around, you run, jump, strafe, and you can attack with one of 4 different kinds of weapons. And granted, most characters only start with their magic wand of choice, though every level begins with a random weapon right in front of you. Slot 1 is for your magic wand, and while it doesn't do much damage at all, it recharges its magical energy quickly, and thus it's always available to you. Each character's wand also behaves slightly differently, sometimes having rapid fire, larger shots, shooting more projectiles at a time, or other such effects. The second slot is for spellbooks, with spells having a wide range of effects, everything from blasts of ice and poison to skulls or even butterflies which home in on your enemies. The third slot is for staves. Magical staves often shoot straight forwards with minimal special effects, which isn't to say there aren't any, it's just with a staff you can expect to have more of a traditional attack. Staves tend to do less damage than spells, but also tend to fire more rapidly. The last slot is for alchemical weapons, such as magical guns and grenades. Alchemical weapons are often very powerful, but difficult to effectively use, either because they're hard to aim or have low rapidity. All of these are just generalizations though, and there are exceptions, so it's more a matter of knowing what to expect with each category, and keeping in mind that you can only have one of each type of weapon at a time. In fact, balancing your weapons plays a big role in surviving this game, but this can be tricky when the game often doesn't give you much of a selection. Now, some characters do start with an extra weapon, which can't help, but many of the weapons have specialist roles, meaning your entire ability to progress often comes down to the random number generator and not necessarily your level of skill. Now, this can be especially telling when you end up getting the same type of weapon 2 or 3 times in a row, making your other mana stores practically useless unless you can acquire some perks to balance things out. The perks are what make the game much more interesting. Now, every time you level up, you'll have to choose between 2 different perks. Now, these perks can be simple things, such as making your wand recharge faster, increasing your movement speed, making potions give you more health, but there's also a number of perks that can drastically alter how you play the game, such as one perk which triples the experience you get, but also doubles the damage you take, or one which reduces your maximum health by a full 75%, but gives you rapidly regenerating health in the process. One of my favorite perks is one which creates a poisonous aura around you, meaning anything which gets close to you is going to get poisoned. And since most of the enemies which would get that close to you have low health, it makes dealing with large groups of them just that much easier. But again, random luck plays a huge factor in this. On more than one occasion, I'll level up and neither of my perk choices are good, or both have potential negative effects. Or sometimes you'll have to make a very tough choice between two really good perks. Now, I don't mind choosing between two good perks so much as two bad ones, though I use the term bad in a relative manner, since some perks only make sense at certain points in time. For instance, there's a perk which makes treasure rooms show up more often. Fair enough. But if you're already on the last level of your current run, you're not going to be generating any more maps, so this perk wouldn't do anything for you. On the flip side, there's a perk which will give you 2 additional level ups immediately, but will greatly reduce all experience you get from that point onward. Now this particular perk is a death sentence if you pick it early on, but once you're on the last level, you might as well just pick it up, seeing as you probably won't get any more levels up by that point. The maps themselves are built out of the same basic layouts, but have different stylings put into place depending on where you are in your progression. One thing you'll quickly learn is that everything conforms to a grid, and that doors can only appear on walls which hit the edges of these grid units. With this knowledge in hand, finding secret rooms is actually pretty easy, as you just have to look for a large crack in the walls in any spots where a door could appear, and if you see one, you just blast it down. Secret rooms always give you a free perk card and have a stained glass window showing you details of a game the designers made in the past. Or at least it would if it didn't glitch out due to a recent update. Actually, yeah, that's something I should point out here, is that this game is still being actively worked on. Now, it's considered to be past beta, as all the features of the game are in, and the game plays through completely and everything. But Milkstone is constantly adding new content. In fact, there was an update just days before I started capturing footage for this video which added a new type of enemy, some new weapons, and addressed some other issues. Not to mention created new issues like the camera going funny in the secret rooms, although there's another new issue with the thorns popping up from underground while fighting the boss Lady Audrey. They still function correctly, but the angle they appear to move at now is not the angle they're actually moving at. But then this is the kind of stuff to be expected when an indie studio is constantly updating their games to make them better. In fact, I think it's a good thing they keep adding new features and such, because this game is lacking one major component of any good dungeon crawl: control over your progression. Now sure, you can choose between a couple perks when you level up, and you don't have to visit the shrines when they're present in a level, but apart from that, you really don't have much say in how your character progresses. And many times, a run can be doomed to failure just from getting really poor perk combinations, weapons, or being faced with a room that's virtually impossible to clear with the weapons you are provided. Which can and does happen. Heck, if the first weapon I get when I start a new game is one that's terrible to start the game with, I'll simply quit and start a new game again. The extremely random nature of the game is both its greatest asset and its greatest failing, something I hope that's addressed as development continues so that the player feels like they have more control over how they progress. Actually, if any of you guys want to try this game out, I do have quite a few tips to give you. The first is that you should always plan ahead. And let's say you get a perk choice early on between attracting items from a further distance or regenerating staff mana, but you started with a spell book, not a staff. Well, odds are good you'll get a staff in the next dungeon level, and if not there, the level after. Plus, you may get perks later on which can take advantage of your staff mana before you even have a staff, such as one particular perk which diverts some of the damage you take to your mana. Unless you really need to be able to pick up items from slightly further away, the regenerating staff mana is probably the best pick under those circumstances. Thinking ahead is the best way to have a solid group of perks. And don't forget too that many perks can themselves be leveled up to 5 levels of strength, often becoming 5 times as effective as when you first get them. Another good tip with the perks is to have lots of different ones and to only level up perks which are extremely useful to you. The reason for this is that unless you're playing as a character who specializes in a particular type of attack, you're going to be spending most of the game balancing your 3 mana reserves, meaning you're also going to need a balance of perks. The other part of the reason though is that one of the perks you can acquire when leveling up increases all of your existing perks by 1 level, which is a very awesome find if you get it later in, though very annoying when you get it on your very first level up. Now with regards to any amulets you find, make sure you remember to take advantage of them, but also remember not to waste their powers if those powers might be useful during a boss fight. Yes, you can recharge your amulets simply by defeating enemies, but if it's not recharged by the time you face a boss, it isn't going to do you much good. Unless it doesn't have much of a use during a boss fight. Basically, consider where you'll get the most use out of your amulet, and don't forget to use it when you should. One unusual tip I have is to move the upgrade button from the U key to the C key. And the reason for this is that many dungeon crawls use the C key to show character stats, which is what the U key will do normally unless you're ready to level up. Which leads into the other reason for doing this, since the moment you level up, you'll probably want to access your new perk immediately, just in case it helps you out in your current battle. And the U key is too far removed from the movement controls to be easily hit during combat. A moot point if you're using an Xbox 360 controller, but worth pointing out all the same. In terms of dealing with trap rooms indicated by a yellow spiked symbol, I have two tips. The first is that many trap rooms can be skirted across diagonally to an adjacent door before the traps have a chance to react to your presence. So this is a good way to cut across certain trap rooms quickly. My other tip is that trap rooms are designed to connect to every single door slot when possible. So if you see a door slot missing from the overhead map, check it out, because there's very likely going to be a secret room there. Now, if you run into obelisks, one obvious tip I have is to always knock the obelisks out before trying to kill anything. As long as obelisks are present, enemies will spawn, and the enemies which spawn don't drop experience. So you absolutely need to take out the obelisks before anything will stay dead. My final tip is also kind of obvious, but always scout out a dungeon floor in its entirety before moving on, since you never know what extra goodies you might find. And because you can use every scrap of experience you can get. Although specific kinds of rooms can only occur once per level, it's not impossible to get virtually every kind of room in a single level. Heck, if you find a shrine room, a treasure box, and a danger room all in a single level, you could theoretically find weapons in each, ultimately resulting in having a full stock of weapons before you even face your first boss. And yeah, that's Ziggurat. It's incredibly fun but incredibly difficult, and often feels like a lot of your progress comes down to luck rather than skill. But it's still actively being worked on, so there may be plenty of new features to come. Heck, just a few days after I first started playing this game, there was an update that added an endless mode that would last as long as you could handle. Though to be honest, it gets exceedingly difficult after the normal point where the game would end anyways. Don't let the content fool you though. This is a first-person shooter first and foremost, so if that's not your cup of tea, then this game's probably going to destroy you. But if you enjoy a good first-person shooter that isn't all about graphic violence, since this game doesn't have any, then this is definitely one that won't disappoint you. I should also quickly point out too that this is a Unity engine game. Now while this isn't a big deal for most people, I'm on Windows 8, which doesn't get along very nicely with Unity. Thankfully, you just have to set compatibility mode to Windows 7 and most issues go away, though performance does drop slightly as a result, which is why my frame rate's been dying in some of those more wide open areas later in the game. Still, minor thing, and just want to make sure anyone else using Windows 8 is aware of that. And that's all for today's filler. Stay tuned for episode 156 of Ancient DOS Games coming out Saturday, March 7th, where we're going to be taking a look at a platformer which was clearly inspired by RoboCop. Although it's not a RoboCop game. If you think you know which game that could be, then send your guess to adg@pixelships.com and stay tuned to see what kind of game I've got in store for you all.